Hi, my name is Sarah Price. I'm a psychological services practitioner from St. Nicholas Hospice.
And my name is Julie Baerwolf, and I also work at the hospice as a specialist psychotherapist working with children and adults. And today, Sarah and I are going to be talking about legacy activities and the importance of them. So before we go into actually really looking at the importance and significance of legacy activities, it would be helpful to think about why we might do this on the ward or people within the community. So let's start with the needs of the dying.
So one of the main ones is preserving and maintaining relationships. You have somebody who may have a terminal illness, and they want to be remembered by their family members, their partners, their children, their parents, something along those lines, once they're gone, once they're deceased.
Mm-hmm. And also it's kind of that provision, isn't it, for coping as well. So it's something that we can do with people to sort of help prepare them, help with the loss that they're going to be experiencing. And that comes with the sense of losing their identity as well as their health deteriorates.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of sometimes it's just activities. You know, if you talk to a physio or an occupational therapist, it's actually just therapeutic to do the activity itself, to work with someone else or work on their own on some of these memory type activities and reminiscing.
Mm. And also sometimes it's reminding them of the life that they have lived and helping them find that meaning as well. So that could be through reminiscence work, it could be storytelling, it could be recording things, it could be engaging other family members as well and being alongside as they go through all of these stages.
And anticipatory grief, for those of you who don't know, is a term we use for those in pre-death, people who know that they have a terminal illness. They know they've gotten a diagnosis that that's very painful for them, and they start the grieving process actually pre-death as opposed to the bereavement after death. And so anticipatory grief for those who are left behind, how to help prepare family members, carers, loved ones, people close to them, who might be going through this process. So it's not what we were talking about earlier would be for the patient. This would be for perhaps a family member or a carer who might be under increased stress, might have secondary traumatic stress, which is the diagnosis itself. Would you like to add anything, Julie?
I think if we're thinking about sort of maybe couples or families where there's young children as well, or possibly adult children with a learning difficulty as well, you might want to sort of really help prepare the children, and through engaging them in activities that can be, you know, a really good way to sort of encourage the, you know, good attachment still, especially if their parent is in and out of hospital and they're really struggling with an anxiety. That is going to be absolutely appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is actually thinking about when the patient was the carer to the survivor. So if there was a child maybe with autism, and this could be, you know, young children, it could be adult children as well, couldn't it? Sometimes, Sarah, we see families on the ward with adult children and they've really been supported and cared for by the parents. They're living at home, they're not able to sort of you know, be independent like, you know, other young adults, and there's that dependency, and they might kind of feel this sort of anxiety over not being able to be there to, you know, support their child, and also thinking about the future and worrying about if they're going to be okay, who's going to look after them, who's going to take on that care role. There's also that lost opportunity to, you know, pass on, you know, all that wisdom that they've got as they get older.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, you know, missing those special moments, which is incredibly sad, and that's where the grief starts, when the patient thinks about that.
So what are legacy activities? They can be all sorts of things, and projects may assist individuals and families in initiating the process of life review. So it could be, as Julie alluded to a moment ago, sitting down and putting perhaps a photo album together, or putting together, letters and journals and life stories. Or it can be the result of a product, and it could be something as simple as fingerprints and handprints, memory boxes. There's all sorts of different ways that legacy activities can be done and completed to meet the individual's wants and desires and abilities, as well as the recipient's wants and desires and abilities.
So I think a really important thing to mention before we go into sort of more detail about them is that actually legacy activities are not for everybody. So there might be some clients, some patients, some family members who would find this really difficult for many different reasons. I mean, it could just be that they're not creative. They don't want to engage in those sort of messy creative things. It might remind them of being a child and hating art. Or it could actually be on a deeper level where they just don't feel ready. They don't want to think beyond not being here anymore for their families. And that's an incredibly difficult situation for them. And although we want to encourage people to talk about and have these difficult conversations, because as we know, Sarah, don't we, it's really important in bereavement that those conversations have been had for those people who have been left behind, because it's helpful for them that they've talked. But if you've got somebody really, really scared and terrified of thinking beyond, then actually these legacy activities are that reminder that actually they're not going to be there. And if it's too painful, then it's not the right thing for
yeah. And the purpose today is to show you the breadth and length and depth of what these activities can be, so that if somebody is interested and they're not, say, arty, as Julie is, and they're less arty like I am, that there's something for them. For example, formalizing memories and experiences. So maybe Nan had, a crumble recipe, so that she used to make every year, for whatever occasion, is actually, writing that story down of, how the recipe itself and when she made it and why she made it, and listening, she can tell that story and somebody else can write it down. She can write that story, but it's to formalize those memories and experience.
Mm. And another idea is kind of really maybe thinking about, the life that they've had before and writing it all down or recording. So sometimes if, depending on how their health is, writing might not be possible, but somebody else could scribe, or recordings are great in order to get all those stories from that person.
And it assists with the grief process. The person who is dying has that anticipatory grief, and the family themselves can kind of process some of these memories and formalize them. And that provides both the grieving process some room to kind of tweeze those things apart, as well as providing emotional support. People can do it together. You can do it on your own. The individual can do it on their own, whether they're the patient or someone close to them, or they can do it as a group. And so it does help with that emotional support.
It does. And I think, there is often that depression and anxiety about the unknown and going into the future and not knowing at all what's going to happen. But one of the things sometimes people worry about is being forgotten and not necessarily having passed on everything that they would like to. So by participating in these legacy activities, there is a possibility that it can reduce the depression, anxiety, knowing that there is something that they are leaving behind for the rest of the family and generations to come.
And something that's not quite so obvious is that unresolved conflicts and unfinished business. And that doesn't necessarily have to be with somebody who is currently alive. Perhaps there's some unresolved conflict with parents who are now deceased, or family members that they don't want to reconnect with, but they want to process something that happened in the past. Writing or journaling can kind of help with that situation, and legacy activities can assist with that as well.
And of course, these are only ideas that we give to the people we work with, and sometimes that can kind of initiate their own sort of idea as well. And they might not have thought, well, actually, like you've just said, Sarah, then this could actually help with something that's been unfinished. So it's by giving ideas to them that which can then lead to something really important and significant for them.
So types of legacy activities. The first, we're going to go into these a little further and later in this conversation, but just to give you some ideas, some sort of general areas. One is patient-centered, where it's specifically the person who is dying, who has the terminal diagnosis or illness, that it revolves around them and an activity for them to complete and do.
And then the intergenerational could be working with the whole family, if there's grandchildren, great grandchildren, siblings, aunties, uncles, getting everyone involved.
And memorial and funeral activities are just as they sound, but it could be the patient planning their own memorial or funeral services, or it could be family members or friends or those close to them planning those themselves or working with the patient to come up with ideas. There's a vast array of options when it comes to memorials and funerals now.
And also remembrance and sort of special occasions and holidays would be going into the bereavement side of things, and just how we can mark those days and think about those people who have died.
So let's start with some patient-centered activities. And we're just going to kind of run through these to give you an idea of things that might appeal. This is in no way an expansive list. This is just, anything you can imagine, but just to give you some ideas to kind of get you started. But there are many, many other options out there as well. So first, with patient-centered activities, one of the, most obvious and direct would be journaling, scrapbooking, or photo albums. And we use also memory boxes, but putting the memories sort of together in one place, whether it's written, as Julie mentioned a moment ago, recorded, if that's not an option, and scrapbooking and albums are the same idea.
And just mentioning the memory boxes, because actually that's a really good point, because actually a lot of people think that memory boxes are only in bereavement. It's a really lovely idea to create. Obviously, if you've got the opportunity, we run an open access bereavement service, so we know that sometimes there's not the time to prepare all of these memory boxes, but the memory box in particular could be done before with the person, with the patient, with the client in mind, rather than just in bereavement. And the casting or printing of hands and feet is a really nice idea, and that can be done for other family members. Or it could be the intergenerational. We could often use, the children, with, they go into the cast as well, and they're created together.
And I've seen recently a lot on fingerprints, which are available, and so you literally could, buy 5 fingerprint necklaces and give it to 5 different grandchildren. So there's just a lot available. As far as an ethical will or legacy letter, that's just a really fancy way of saying a letter, I think. But legacy letters are more about, writing to somebody a lot about, it could be something about how you want your funeral arrangements to be. It could be about what I know from work with Julie is it could be, to your children to read at a later date. This is how I lived my life. These are our values. This is my work ethic. This is what I thought about this or that, so that they can carry your thoughts and beliefs and values going forward in your own words.
So the cards to family members or friends, it is again very individual. So some people will, especially if they have young children, they might choose to write letters or cards to sort of mark their big birthdays, 16th, 18th, 21st, or when their children might get married. So it can be really, really difficult to do and very painful to do, but we know from working with children in bereavement that actually when they open those cards and letters, that they get to remember that maybe their mum had written this for them. They spent time wanting to write this. It's a new hand, the writing, a new brand new letter that they've seen. The only thing with that, I would say, is if they are doing that to prepare the children in how many letters or cards they're going to be given, just because there isn't going to be an endless flow of letters their whole life. But yeah, absolutely, that's certainly something that is a really lovely thing to receive.
And the next one is art project, but I think I'd branch it out, not being an arty person, to some other projects. But an art project obviously is just as it sounds, and the patient can do it on their own to leave to somebody or work with somebody else to do it. But also, as I mentioned, a cobbler, a cooking, things that somebody has the physical ability to do, that helps them leave their imprint. A garden project. If they're into gardening, anything like that suits their desire and their physical ability.
And the videos are just another way, instead of the cards or letters. I've worked with somebody who did videos for all of his children, and that was enough. He didn't want to do anything else, but the video is that reminder for the child, or other family member, that hearing that person's voice, and just watching them, and it's a message, isn't it?
And lock of hair, I think, is pretty self-evident.
So now we're going into the intergenerational activities. So very similar as well, aren't they, to the ones we've already been speaking about. So the scrapbooking can be done with the whole family. Getting everybody involved is a really nice way to be able to spend time with people and have something to do. It can sometimes feel quite awkward for family members or teenagers, especially when there's a deterioration in their mother or their grandparent, and having something practical to do just really helps them feel more comfortable being alongside.
And I've seen sometimes where the scrapbooking is themed. So it could be our beach holidays, it could be our Christmases through the years. So sometimes you can narrow it down a little bit and make it more specific. And sometimes it's just our family. So in a family tree or timeline is sort of the same idea. It's particularly good for somebody who doesn't have the interest or ability to do letters or journaling. So it could just be a history of my life as a timeline, or it could be our family tree, and you can work with it with family members, or you can work on it to give to family members. So that's another option.
And the handprints, we've already spoken about how nice it can be for several family members to get their hands done. Portrait session as well, fantastic. Making new memories. Sometimes we actually have people who are photographers, and their scrapbooks are pretty amazing, aren't they, with all the photos in.
And we talked about art projects with the family map, or if you want a fancier word, a genogram. Family maps are good. And I'll just tangentially also mention, going through old photographs and writing on the back who they are, if you still have photographs in your life and it's not all digital, but pointing out who family members are, because sometimes when someone dies, they're the last connection to who are these people in these pictures generations back that we can't recall. And the family map does the same thing, tells that story, that the patient or dying person won't be able to share with them in the future. And a family's mission statement is much like the legacy letter, but written from a family perspective. So both on the part of, let's say if I were the patient, I might be writing about what the family means to me, but you can also join that in by having other members in the family also sort of write their own kind of legacy letter and put them all together. And that's sort of your family statement.
Just to add there, I was just thinking about when we were talking about the scrapbooking, it could also be something about the future. So not only about the past and the present, but also the future.
Mm-hmm.
So if it is a parent who is dying and they know that they are leaving their young children, what do they want for their future? Mm-hmm. They could work together on the scrapbook, and it could sort of be ideas of parenting as well, and what they would like, how they would like their other parent to parent their children, and They can be a nice way of involving everybody as well.
Sort of like a visual vision board of a legacy letter.
Yeah,
These are the
yeah,
values,
yeah.
education and honesty, whatever it might be, and to do a visual portrayal of that. I love that. That's really cool.
So now we are moving into the bereavement side of things, the activities that you can do sort of at the funerals.
So just starting with a photo board, and I think it's pretty commonplace now to have photos or slideshows or that sort of thing. What's really good to think about with something like that, or any of these really going forward, is including other people in that. The photo board it can be something created by the patient, the client, the dying person before they die. These are things that would be important to me to have at my service. But if there are young children or other well, actually anybody else, involved, that these are things that they could be involved in picking and choosing as well. Particularly good if it's something that you feel somebody might be too young or too fragile to participate in another way in the service, that maybe they can pick out some photos that they'd like to use, as well as adolescents tend to be very good at technology, and it's a way to be sort of quietly involved.
And also it might be a nice idea to sort of ask other family members as well for photos, so that you're getting a real mixed a sort array of different photos of different times in that person's life as well. We've already talked about recipes, sort of, or quotes and things like that, where it's been really important for that person, and where other people would really be like, oh yes, I remember this person, and it's their apple crumble, or and then it's passed down. But I worked with a client in art therapy, and as she knew she was coming to the end of her life, she chose some of the images that we were doing in art therapy, probably like 10 images, and we turned them into postcards. And these postcards were put into packs and given to everybody who attended the funeral. So it was a lovely gift from my client to give to her friends and family members, but it was also, obviously so, important for those people to get something unexpected as well, that they knew that, she had painted and wanted them to have.
I recently went to a service for a gentleman who had MND, and he knew his death was imminent, and he'd picked out the music that was played, which was great. What the wife did, who had put the service together, is in the program service, she had put in a poem he had read to her at their wedding 25 years prior. And that was just a nice touch, that I wouldn't normally consider, but it was certainly moving.
Mm. And then again, the wildflower seeds, or the trees, they've become quite popular, sort of handing those out. And yeah, I think a lot of people have been using those.
Yeah, and I would throw in the caveat that, as you did earlier, another caveat, like with the letters, with the memory trees and the plantings, I would just warn people that, are you going to be able to stay with, what if the plant dies? I recently worked with a gentleman who actually was dealing with bereavement years after the death of someone, because they were selling house and moving and leaving a very mature tree behind. And that was sort of a fresh pain for him. So, that doesn't make it not a great activity for people, but just something to consider.
I think that's a really good point, Sarah. I think a lot of people are using sort of like there's organizations where they can sort of put their ashes into like rows, but they're planted in, they're not planted in the ground, so you can actually take the pots with you wherever you move to. But then there is always the danger, isn't there, of killing the rose, and then obviously. Which I'm very good at, roses.
Yeah, so it's perfect for some people, like all of these activities, perfect for some, not so perfect for others.
Okay.
And so remembrance activities. So these are just as it says on the tin, things to do perhaps to help you remember, to help you reminisce later. So again, memory quilts, pillows, bears is, what happens is you take articles of clothing and you can make teddy bears for children or adults. I have a pillow with some clothing from my stepfather. Some people make quilts, but it's to have sort of a constant reminder, something at hand for when you want to sort of think about the person who is now deceased. And that's what these activities sort of go along.
So these activities also, just thinking, we've been talking about the patient in all of this, but if there was a sudden death, a bereavement where actually we haven't been able to plan all of these things and prepare. So these are really nice things that we can now do as well for anybody, any bereavement, any loss. So repurposing treasured items. It could be, somebody who's getting married and, they want to have a part of their, mum's or grandma's wedding dress, and they're able to sort of make it part of their own. Or wearing somebody's jewelry, but changing it into something that you would actually wear.
I recently worked with somebody whose partner had done watercolors, and she had their watercolors reproduced, I should say. They say it wasn't exactly a repurpose, but reproduced and used it to do some wallpapering on an accent wall or something like that. I never saw it myself, but she described it to me. I thought I never heard that before, and I thought that was a really, really great idea. So she could look at his artwork all the time, but it was also not intrusive. Tattoos are pretty evident. Some people get images, some people get dates, some people get something that means something just to them. And when they look at it, whatever the symbol is, whether it's a symbol or a fish or an animal or something, they know what it means, and it makes them feel closer to the person who has died.
And some people also add the person's ashes into the ink and tattoo them into the skin as well. So the handwriting and the fingerprint jewelry we've already spoken about. The handwriting is really nice. I remember recently someone told me that she'd gone through all the letters of her husband who had died and found a love dad, and she used the love dad as a surprise for her children, and that's what's going to be printed onto just like a little chain for the children. And his writing,
to go back to the recipes that we mentioned earlier in the handwriting, I once went to a funeral service where the back of the program of service had a recipe in the deceased person's handwriting. So it was her banana bread recipe in her handwriting. So it was a really unique and neat way to kind of merge all those things together.
So the planting a tree we've already talked about. Some people, instead of asking for money for charities or flowers, they might, send out a link to say, how about let's help the environment, and would you plant a tree instead?
Yeah, and I think along those lines, so it's not like we were talking about earlier about planting a tree in your garden or planting your garden, but not only purchasing that, but benches and plaques on benches, and especially if the person who has died is into national trust sites or there's particular parks or locations, you can do things that are location specific for the person who has died. And then shadow box and frames, I think, are pretty self-evident too. And you can do, obviously a photo or a photo collage is probably comes right to mind, but with the shadow boxes and the frames, you can frame articles of clothing, you can frame mementos and things that were important that you would like to be able to see at hand in a aesthetically pleasing way.
And they're commonly used of baby loss, aren't they? But absolutely any bereavement, they can look really nice, and also be a special gift, to a family member as well. So when we're marking anniversaries, it can be really difficult because some people just want that day to be over with. And some people don't want to celebrate the anniversary because it's a reminder that that person's been gone a year, 2 years, 3 years. Some people, though, do want to celebrate that person's life. And now that we're not really allowed to let off balloons because of all the, the animals and the farmers, some people tend to use ladybirds and butterflies.
And it was actually working Nikki's way with you, Julie, that a parent told me about not celebrating anniversaries for just the reason you mentioned, but they celebrate birthdays. Yeah. So, so it may be, we're not celebrating the day she died, but we will do something like a ladybird or a butterfly release on her birthday.
Mm-hmm. So again, and that's okay, isn't it? Every family is different, and I think some parents might say, "Oh, I don't know whether to tell my child it's the anniversary. Why would I want to tell them it's a reminder that their person's died?" But we would always kind of say, well, check out with them if the child is old enough and they want to do something, and if they don't, they don't. But birthdays, could be that day where you do sort of celebrate, make a cake. Yes, it's that reminder that they're not there anymore, but it's still, remembering them.
And special occasions and holiday activities, that's what we were leading into there. Earlier, Julie mentioned, wedding dresses. So it can be hard if you're getting married and you want somebody who is now deceased to be a part of that wedding ceremony. So it could be the something old, something borrowed. It could be, incorporating something in the wedding dress. There's all sorts of different ways you can do it, candlelights, ornaments, favorite fragrances and recipes. Anything I'm missing, Julie? Your thoughts?
No, I think we've gone through most of this, haven't we? But yes, I mean, candles are, a really nice way to sort of remember people as well, and just to have that minute, just silence and calm and peace.
And I think it's probably a good time to remind people that, it's horses for courses, that there's no one way that's right. There's no one way that's wrong. It's really individualistic and personal. Some people won't want to do any of these. People will think of, I'm sure if you Google this, you can come up with a million ideas that we haven't thought of. That it's very flexible. It's just kind of thinking about how you want that person to be present, if you want them to be present, and what you can do to make that happen.
And, just also to remind people that, again, it's very normal and appropriate to have a dip and to feel more depressed than usual, or for that grief to be a lot bigger when there is that special occasion, where that person isn't there, and you just really, all you want is for that person to be there. So some people, by wearing their favorite perfume, that would just be too much, because it's like they're really there when they're not. So yeah, as you said, Sarah, it's very individual to what people choose and feel comfortable with, but they're just ideas that people might like to try. And then we've got some resources.
And again, this isn't all encompassing either. It's really just a matter of, looking online and coming up with what works for you or what doesn't work for you. I would also like to throw out there that you're more than welcome to contact Julie or myself at the St. Nicholas Hospice. If you'd like a copy of this PowerPoint, we're more than happy to send it out. And anything else that we can assist with.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you soon.